Hi, I'm Mike Caldwell. I'm the Director of the Business Innovation Zone. The Business Innovation Zone, or the BIZ, was created to help high-growth potential entrepreneurs and businesses in central Iowa. We provide a variety of services, including mentoring, consulting, counseling, validating business models, and help with access to funding for high-growth companies. We offer also a number of networking opportunities, including luncheons once a month and all-day seminars on subjects such as marketing and finance. You can find out more about the BIZ at www.bizci.org.
He mentioned sales habitudes, and I had worked with companies in sales consulting, and then talked about execution. And what I was finding with a lot of companies is that when things aren't going well, they would look at sales and say, we got to fix sales, we got to fix sales. And so often sales is not the problem, it's just the thing that's measured the most and it's easiest to point the finger at. And often it's that senior leadership and the planning and execution and vision and all that stuff that they need to be doing that really kind of lets the sales side down in a way. They don't have the direction and so on that they need. So that's kind of how I got into this, recognizing that problem. But I'm not going to talk anything about sales at all today. So give me a sense for who's here. Raise your hand if you own a business or if you're the senior leader, you're the president or whatever. Okay, so that's most of you. I'm assuming that the rest of you are either part of the senior leadership team or you're an influencer in your company or you aspire to own your own business. Is that about right? Does that cover everybody? Okay, so in your day-to-day work, you're trying to make a buck, you got the activities going on, and you have issues flying at you all the time, right? You've got something coming up, a problem, an opportunity, customer problem. Everybody with me here? Nod your head, give me an amen, whatever, when you know what I'm talking about. Let me know you're with me. So when you got these issues coming at you, if you can't just duck the issue starting off, a lot of things that we do, one thing we do is that issue comes at me, I just grab some duct tape and I wrap that issue up, okay? That's gonna hold for now, I'll put it down and then I move on because I got stuff to do, right? Another issue comes flying at you, you grab some twine and you wrap it up, tie a good knot, hey, that's gonna hold, we're good to go. Maybe you put some Band-Aids on it. If you're the CFO or the money person in your company, you might grab a bucket and you're walking around trying to catch all the money leaking in different places. Okay, so eventually what can happen, you've got all these decisions flying at you, opportunities, whatever, all the time. Pretty soon you've got this big ball of duct tape and twine, and maybe you're carrying a bucket that you're just dragging around. Okay, does this resonate with anybody? You have this? This is what starts to anchor your business. It's what starts to, anchor in a bad way. It's what starts to slow your business down. It's what can get in the way of the execution that Mike is talking about. And what it does is it starts to create frustrations. Let me ask this. If you got together with your leadership team, and maybe that's just you, and you started to think about the number of issues that you handle, maybe they're opportunities, they're not all bad. Would 1 a week or 2 a week, would that be an accurate number of things you didn't necessarily plan on to handle that come up? Yeah? Does it happen over and over again? Would it be accurate to say over a year, maybe you've got 50 or 100 of these things flying at you? Okay. These things, they stack up and they start to cause frustration. Let's see if, okay, that works. All right. And so the frustrations are in areas, first off, of control. Obviously, if you've got this many things coming at you all the time, you might start to feel like you're out of control. You might be frustrated about profit, and these days, that's a big deal. So many companies have flatlined or worse, and trying to figure out how to get that to go in the right direction. I think this is the biggest issue that we all deal with. That's the people issue. That might be customers, that might be employees, that might be vendors. And business would usually be great if it weren't for employees, customers, all that stuff, right? It'd be a lot more fun. And then there's the hitting the ceiling. That's, right with the profit issue, but, how do we get beyond where we're at. Maybe we've been at the same place for a long time and we just can't seem to break through to the next level. And finally, there's the trying lots of stuff frustration. This is kind of that Band-Aid thing. We may decide, all right, we need to get to the next level, we need to increase sales, we need to do whatever we want to do. We'll set a goal, and 30 days later, we're still at the same place. This is where we are when we set quarterly goals or annual goals, and those second quarter goals we're still working on in the third quarter, we've carried them over. Or how many people, and you don't have to raise your hand or talk about this, but how many of you set and actually wrote down 2011 goals at the beginning of the year, and here we are almost at the end of 2011, and if you pull them out and look at them, a lot of them haven't moved at all. Does that make sense to anybody? If it's not your company now, that's great. It's certainly been places where you've worked, I am sure. This happens all the time. So it's just trying to move forward. It's about that execution. So we're going to talk about all these issues, these things flying at you. When we look at it, we know that the root cause of most of these problems fall into one of 6 areas. We talk about these as the 6 components of your business. And to the degree that you get a handle and master these 6 components, you can minimize and eliminate a ton of these issues that are slowing you down and causing you to hit the ceiling and flatline. And when issues do come along, you'll have the skill set to handle them one time and get them out of the way. No more duct tape and twine, that kind of stuff. So the first area, the first component is vision, and I know this is the point where people start to say, okay, now he really sounds like a consultant, because we're going to start with vision, okay? I know, everybody's got vision. And what I'm talking about here is not that one paragraph that somebody wrote or the 10 paragraphs that wrote about where the company's going. It winds up in a notebook somewhere, or perhaps it even gets framed and put up on the wall, but it really doesn't guide us in our day-to-day operation of the business. I'm not talking about that vision, I'm talking about something deeper. There's also the people component. The Jim Collins, good to great, get the right people on the bus, and yeah. It's more consultant talk is what it sounds like now. But we are really bad at getting the right people on the bus. We either don't try and systemize how we do it, or sometimes we make it too complicated, but we're just going to talk about how to really kind of simplify that process. There's the data component. What are the numbers that help us understand if our business is healthy? There's the issues component. What this component is about is all these things flying at us. How do we handle them? How do we set them up and knock them down and get them out of the way? There's the process component. How do we operate? How do we do things consistently and in a way that's scalable in our business? And finally, there's the traction component. And this is where you bring it all together and execute. So I'm going to go back and we're going to get into some of these in a little bit of detail. I'm going to spend a disproportionate amount of time on a few of them, and a few of them I'm just going to fly through. Just because this is really about 7 days worth of work packed into a 90-minute presentation. 7 full days worth of work for a company spread out over a year, packed into a 90-minute presentation, which we have 60 minutes to do. So we'll be flying through some of this stuff. So the first component is the vision component. And like I said before, this is not that flowery couple of paragraphs that we might be used to when we take a look at vision. What this is for us is answering 8 questions. Okay, and I'm going to talk about the first 5 in this component. And in your handouts, about the 3rd page down, you're going to find the Vision Traction Organizer. The first 2 pages is just an assessment you can do at any time to kind of tell you where you're at on these 6 components. Then when you get to the first page of the Vision Traction Organizer, This is where you will answer these 5 questions for yourself, and feel free to mark this stuff up. If anyone wants more copies of this stuff, send me an email. I'll send you an electronic copy of whatever we got here. So, and the idea of this sheet, by the way, you see it's mostly white space. There's not a lot of room for writing. It's to force you to be, simple and precise and keep it short. So, starting with these 8 questions. The first question you're going to see up there is answering core values. Almost every Fortune 500 company, if you go to their website, they've got their core values. They're probably up there. A lot of companies have their core values. And for a lot of people, it just seems like a mundane exercise, or we've done this before. But there's a lot of mistakes made when people create core values. First of all, a lot of times they're not really core. The marketing department has put together the core values, and so the core values don't really represent what we're all about. They sound good to our clients. Bob, you're laughing over there. Have you had that experience? Okay, so yeah, at the company I was at way back, they did that, and they said, here's who we are. Here's what everyone here values, and it didn't make any sense to everybody because that's not the way we operate every day. So at any rate, one of those mistakes is that the marketing department does the core values and they're not really core. Another thing that happens when we do core values is we create aspirational core values. We come up with a list of things that we want to represent us and how we behave during the day, but they're not core because this is how we wish our employees would behave. So we create these things and we're going to start telling them this is what we're all about, but we don't reinforce it. We don't lead by example, those kinds of things. So the core values, again, become meaningless. And finally, core values, a lot of times people create what I call table stakes values. They'll create values like, we're customer focused, we're honest, we work hard here, we're professional. If you go to people's websites, you're going to see at least one of those core values up there. But the expectation is that if I'm going to hire you to work for me, I expect you to be honest, right? I expect you to work hard and be professional, so this doesn't really change behavior and lead us. It really doesn't help contribute to any kind of vision. There are exceptions to that. I'll give you one. Safeco Insurance Company, before their merger with American States in the last decade, professionalism was one of their core values. And to them, it truly was core. Back in the late 90s, if you worked for Safeco, the men, regardless of what role you had to wear a suit to work. And I'm not talking about khakis and a blue blazer. That did not meet the dress code. It had to be a suit. And this shirt was unacceptable for Safeco at that time. It had to be a white dress shirt matching the suit. If you were a woman working at Safeco, you couldn't, get a skirt and a nice jacket, match them together and go to work. You had to wear, the women's suit, but it had to come as a set, or you didn't meet the dress code. They took professionalism to the extreme. So that value was core for them. It guided their behavior. It changed the way they interacted with people. When I get to the people component, you'll see how these core values kind of play in. But doing it right, doing it well, is a big piece of creating a vision. That's real vision. The second piece on here is core focus. Where is your company going to focus? And we get into we talk about what we do as a company, but that's not exactly focus. And I think I've got an example here. The focus ought to be, what's your reason for being and what's your passion as a company? Mary Kay, for example, is to give unlimited opportunity for women. This is what they're about. This gets people excited at the company. One of my favorites is Nike, which is to experience the emotion of competition, winning, and crushing competitors. That kind of vision is going to get people excited. It's going to give them direction. It's going to change their behavior and the way they operate in the company. Does that make sense? So, it's where your passion meets your competency is where you need your company to be. So the competency, the next thing there on the core focus is what's your niche, and this is what you can be really good at. What can you be the best in the world at, or at least the best in your marketplace? What can you be the best at in Des Moines? So where your passion collides with your real competency, that's where you need to focus your business. So again, when you match up core values and core focus in some concise statements here, you're starting to get a vision formed, a real vision that's going to start to impact the company. Next is the 10-year target question. This doesn't have to be 10 years. It might be 20 years. It might be 5 years. If you're in the technology business, a year in the technology business is kind of like dog years. A human year is about 7 years to a dog. A normal business year in some of these technology businesses is like 7 years because they move so fast. So the long-term vision you don't have to stick with 10 years. But this is really the big, hairy, audacious goal. This is, again, something Jim Collins talks about in Good to Great. We start to get more specific here, but this is where we're moving. And I'll give you a couple other examples so this starts to make sense. Coca-Cola's is put a Coke within the reach of every human being on the planet. Big, hairy, audacious goal there. Nike's, which is my favorite, is to crush Adidas. That's their stated long-term goal, is to crush Adidas. There's a company here in town that their big, hairy, audacious goal is to be the Harley-Davidson of their industry. Okay? It's more specific than that, but to be the Harley-Davidson of their industry. And that is an emotional trigger for the people in that company. They understand what that means. If you know anything about riding and Harley-Davidsons, there's something special about having a Harley. People will pay more money just for that experience because it's different than anything else. And so that is that's the guiding vision for this company. It's a piece of it. Next is the marketing strategy. Just answering a few questions there. I'm not going to go through all of that, but just talk a little bit about target market and your uniques in that place. And I'll give you an example of someone I worked with a few years ago. This was a financial planning business, and this financial planner talked to me, introduced himself, and I asked him, why should I do business with you as opposed to the other 10 financial planners that are in the room or on the block right now, because they're everywhere, right? And his response initially was, well, I really get to know my clients and what they want and blah, blah, blah. Every financial planner says that. The reason I know is I ask every one of them I meet that question. It's just kind of a game to me, but I get the same answer most of the time. So as we started to talk about it, and he said, this is part of the frustration for me, because when people ask me what I do and I tell them I'm a financial planner, it's like I just farted on an elevator. Nobody wants to look you in the eye. Nobody wants to ask you any more questions. They learn what you do, and that's it. So we started to talk about that some, and we started to talk about what his passion was, and it was working with small business owners. And we started to talk about, well, what's unique about working with a small business owner as opposed to somebody that's a W-2 employee somewhere. And right off the bat, he understands it's liquidity and control. A small business owner needs to maintain liquidity with his investments because, opportunities come along and you need cash, right? Bad quarters come along and you need cash. So if you make the same type of recommendations that most financial planners make, it's kind of going to fall flat. They wouldn't be small business owners if they didn't like a certain amount of control either. So now, if you ask him what he does, it's, well, I help small business owners grow their wealth while maintaining liquidity and control. And this is an example of a marketing strategy, just a small piece about how you can focus in on a market and understand what's unique about your approach. And when it becomes part of your vision, especially in a larger company, it really starts to steer your marketing and sales department, even if it's only you. Make sense? This is why it goes into the vision. And finally, the 3-year picture. And this is actually my favorite part of these first 5 questions that we're going to talk about. At this point, and this is on the far right side of the Vision Traction Organizer, you answer a few questions. The first one being the revenue. And let's say you want to be a $10 million revenue company 3 years from now. So we get those goals, and this is something you do with your leadership team. You hammer out those goals, and these are like your SMART goals to start with. But then there's that white space with bullet points. And what this is for you to get together with the leadership team, and again, it might just be you, but ask everybody to take like 10 minutes and brainstorm. When we're hitting these goals, when we're a $10 million revenue company, what does it look like? What does it feel like? Start writing those bullet points down. And then when they're done, you throw all that up on the board. And here's what it's like until we hammer this out. I've got 5 kids, by the way, so this is why these examples are on my mind. If I gave everybody a picture of a unicorn out of a coloring book, okay, and the unicorn, the black lines on the white page of the unicorn, that represents our SMART goals, our $10 million revenue in 3 years. But if you each had one and I gave you each a box of crayons and said, color that unicorn, would we, out of this room, would we get any 2 unicorns that look alike? You think we would? It's unlikely. Some of you are going to put spots on your unicorn, stripes, little magical stars around the horn, whatever it is. I've seen it all. I've got a couple of twin 5-year-olds, and they bring me their art every day. But the idea is that when we set these goals, and here's the problem with the vision, we all agree on where we're going, but we've got a totally different idea of what it looks and feels like when we get there. So 3 years down the road, what are the odds that we're going to get there? They get pretty slim right from the beginning. In practical terms, this is where you have one leader that thinks, well, look, at $10 million of revenue, we've got to totally upgrade technology. And someone else is thinking the key is more locations to serve the customers. And someone else is thinking, it's all about R&D. It's about getting new products out there into our target market. Someone else is thinking, no, it's more about market penetration, the same product. We need to move into new states or more locations. So when you get this 3-year picture and you get all this, what it looks and feels like up on the board, and you start to have healthy discussion, maybe some serious arguments about what it looks like, and then you come to an agreement. Now you've got some serious leadership vision. Does that make sense to everybody? This is not the 1 or 2 paragraphs you just write out in a weekend retreat session and put out there. When you answer these 5 questions, and we're going to hit 3 more in a little bit, you're really starting to get everybody on the same page and have a serious vision going on. Next is the 1-year plan, quarterly rocks and issues, which I'll talk about later. When you have this vision, the next discipline with the vision is making sure it's shared by all. This is constantly talking to people in your company about it, sharing it quarterly, giving a speech, reminding people of what the core values are, catching them doing it, telling other people about so-and-so that was exhibiting this behavior that's a core value, and so on. It gets to the point where when you start to talk about it, people start to roll their eyes. That's the idea, because they know what you're going to say. It's like raising kids. You're giving the lecture for the 100th time, and they know what you're going to say. And our rule is that until you have said it 7 times, it hasn't been heard the first time. So over and over again, we basically beat a dead horse with the vision so that people know what it is. Now let's move on to the people component. The people component, first off, it's getting the right people on the bus, right? So how do we do that? Well, this is where the core values start to come in. And you're going to find this sheet in your packet behind the Vision Traction Organizer. This is the People Analyzer. And this is a really simple tool for helping you to start getting the right people on the bus. I'm going to fill in, here are some core values of a company. And so this is the way they get used. When you have these and you start to fill in names, Sally Jones, she is humbly confident. She displays this core value, say 75% of the time, most of the time, so she gets a plus. And she does this all the way across the board. John Smith, about 75% of the time, does not display these core values, as an example. George Wilson, you know, 50-50, 60-40, 40-60, so he gets a plus minus. This is just an example of how this simple tool works to start to implement core values in your company. And these core values, you need to hire and fire, reward and recognize according to these things, or you've got the wrong people. Has anyone worked in an organization where you clearly have a wrong person in the organization? You know, if you haven't, it was probably you. You know, it didn't just fit. If there were some unstated core values, expected behaviors, and there's always some people who just got to go in a different direction. I had one in my recruiting firm, and you know, I didn't have this kind of tool. I knew it wasn't working, but I didn't have anything substantive to push me or to push the people around me to pull the trigger on this issue that I had to deal with. And you know, we've all had that. If you've hired more than 2 or 3 people, you've had it. But at any rate, when we're looking to get the right people, right person means they fit our core values. And eventually, you know, as a leadership team, you set the bar. So your core values, you should not have more than 3 to 5, where they start to become meaningless. But like in this case, you have 3, and their bar is that a person has to have 3 pluses and a couple plus minuses, any negatives, and they don't fit here. You know, if it's too many plus minuses, then they're not really a fit. It doesn't mean someone's a bad person at all. It just means they're not a fit. You know, my family has their core values. Not every one of you would fit well and be comfortable in my family with our core values. It does not mean that they're right or wrong. It just simply means there's not a fit, and that's the way corporations are. And people that aren't a fit are giant anchors. They drag you down, right? So this is how we use this document. You have a blank one in there. Again, if you want more, send me an email on that. So when we have the right people, now we need to get people in the right seats. And this starts with getting the right structure for your business. We have to know what the right seats are for your business. And we start with an accountability chart. It looks like an org chart. It's a little bit different, and I'm just going to put a basic one up here. You know, this is a basic company. Almost everything basically falls into these 3 areas. Sales and marketing may be separate operational units, or IT may be a separate unit and not part of operations, or HR. But we've got these units, and they report to the integrator, which is the president, CEO. This is the person responsible for integrating these units and making them all function for the good of the company. Ideally, they're not competing with each other inside the company. They're working for the good of the whole bit. One of the structural changes that may have to happen in a company is a lot of companies have a visionary in the company. Perhaps the person that started the company is the visionary and not so much the integrator. The visionary is the person that, you know, has 10 ideas every week and about 1 or 2 of them are good. They're the person that is really good with investor relationships, relationships out in the community and things like that, but execution and managing things aren't necessarily their bailiwick. Sometimes the company is just started by a pure integrator. This is kind of the E-Myth idea. You have someone who's really a technician, the baker, who wants to start their own company, and they're really good at it, and they get some structure around their business, but when it comes to taking it to the next level, they don't have the vision skills to do that. So in some companies, just changing the structure and recognizing, letting someone, giving you permission to say, all right, you're not the visionary, okay? I release you from having to be the visionary. You're the integrator, or vice versa. This could be a structural change that you have to happen. Another example of structural changes that might have to happen that's probably more relevant to everybody is, let's say you're in a company and you have done this 3-year picture of what things are going to look like. To become a $10 million revenue company, you've decided that we really need to upgrade our technology. Thus far in the company, the guy that has handled our technology is Technology Joe. I'm going to say Technology John. John's the Mac guy. But so far, Technology John has handled everything for us. If someone's computer locks up, if we need to get Wi-Fi installed, get something new set up, he's kind of handled it. But we've decided as a leadership team, really to make it to the next level, we've got to move into the cloud, we've got to get new systems in, get them integrated, and so on. So John meets those core values in the company. He's the right person for the company. But when we start to look at this new position, we've got this function name, we'll call it Director of IT. We start to figure out what is he accountable for? What are the 3 to 5 things? And this is different than a job description, just kind of describing the general things you take care of. This is what a person is actually accountable for on the chart. So it's a little bit different. But when we look at John, we have to ask these questions. To take us to that next level, to reach the 3-year picture, does John get it? Does he understand where we need to go? Does he want that job? You probably want the job, right? Right, John? All right. And then does he have the capacity to do it? So we've got the right person, meets our core values. He is at or above the bar on core values. But again, when we're doing the structure, to know if that person's in the right seat, they have to get it, want it, and have the capacity to do it. Does that make sense to everybody? So if you're the leader, if you're the owner of the company, this can put you in a position of having to make some hard decisions, especially if you figure out that perhaps one of the people on the leadership team either doesn't meet the core values, or in the seat that they're currently in, we no longer need that seat, or they don't really have the capacity to take us to the next level. But that's the privilege of command, is getting to make those hard decisions and figure out what to do. All right, so those are the first 2 components. You ought to start to see how having a really solid vision and getting the right people around you, right people, right seats, can start to make a difference when it comes to handling those issues and execution. We'll keep going, talk about that. The data component, very simple. This is about having a scorecard, whether it's a dashboard, whatever metrics you have. It just tells you, are we healthy? Are we trending in the right direction? I'm not really going to talk about this. There's a simple example. But something 5 to 15 numbers that you can look at every week and know if we're healthy. Did we do enough sales presentations this week? Are our customer complaints going up or down? Is our on-time shipping up or down? Quality control, whatever. But you got to have the data to tell you if you're healthy. The next piece of that is having a measurable, and this is pushing measurables down for everybody in your company. And this is simply something where people can know walking out the door each day if they did a good job or not. If you have a receptionist, the number might be 2. Answer the phone in 2 rings instead of 3. If it's customer service, how many problems did you resolve today? Those kinds of things. As the leader, you can walk by and say, hey, Shannon, what was your number yesterday? 4. He says, okay, it was 4. Great job, Shannon. Or 4, what happened? Tell me about it. But this keeps everybody focused, on the ball, heading towards the vision. And again, helps to eliminate these issues that slow us down. So I won't talk any more about data. Now, when you have a strong vision and you have the right people and you have the data, your organization starts to become very transparent. The problems that you have, the issues that you have to deal with, bubble up and become obvious, which brings us to the next component, which is the issues component. The first discipline here is to have a list of everything that you need to deal with, everything that comes up. In meetings all the time, people say, you know what, we ought to do something about that, or we ought to talk about this. It's not always the time to talk about it, but the idea is to have a discipline where we always have a list of those things. On the second page of your Vision Traction Organizer is a spot just for the issues list, and you keep a running list of these things so we don't forget about them. And right now I'm just going to talk about how we handle the issues, just the issues track, and then when we get to traction, it'll all kind of come together. But when it comes to handling issues, we want to do it in a certain way. Part of the problem is that, and by the way, IDS stands for Identify, Discuss, and Solve. And what we love to do is discuss. When things come up, we love to talk about it, and talk about it, and talk about it, and then we end the meeting and we schedule another meeting to talk about it some more. We go to the water cooler, or we go to lunch, and we talk about it some more, right? So what we need to do when we have issues, we have this list, and I'll show you when we get to traction, we have a designated time for handling issues on a weekly basis. But the first thing to do is to take that issues list, and like with your leadership team, you just say, okay, take 30 seconds, what's 1, 2, and 3? What are the top 3 issues we're going to deal with? We quick get a consensus. If there's no consensus, the leader just says, we're going to talk about this issue, number 1. So we prioritize them real quick. And the reason we do that is because the first issue we think of a lot of times is not the most important. It's not the most pressing, the thing that we get going on. And we can spend a couple hours talking about an issue, trying to come up with a solution, or debating on something that really isn't that important, or certainly isn't the most important thing on the list. So this is why we have the discipline of prioritizing our issues real quick at the start of each meeting where we're going to handle these things. Then we don't jump right into the discussion. The first thing to do is just take 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and make sure we have identified the root cause of our issue. We can spend a lot of time talking about things, and we haven't even figured out why it's a problem. So as a habit, as part of our track, if we take 60 seconds and say, is this a vision issue? Is this a people issue? Is this a data issue? Does it have something to do with process? Is it an execution thing? Is it something else? But we identify the root cause so we can have a focused discussion. And then in the discussion, here are some quick rules about it. You're only allowed to give your opinion one time. Anything else is politicking. We're trying to sell our idea. And if as a leadership team we're focused on listening to each other, I know that I'm heard, I don't have to repeat myself or really push for my opinion, but we talk about things once, have open and honest discussion, and try and create an atmosphere where there is healthy conflict. Again, I describe it like being in a family. You can come together and have disagreements, get to argue over things, maybe even get into some name calling in the family, but in the end, we come to a decision and it's like, all right, cool, let's have dinner. We can have that healthy conflict and move on for the greater good and be done with it. And that's the kind of thing we need on leadership teams. But in the discussion, we discuss it, and then we come to a solution. If you're doing it well with the leadership team, about 80% of the time after we have identified the root cause of the issue and had our discussion, the obvious answer, the obvious solution is just going to bubble up, and everyone's going to come to a quick agreement about 80% of the time. The other 20% of the time, the leader just has to say, thank you for everyone's input, here's my decision. So when we come to a solution, it has to be for the greater good of the company. Usually it's just the simplest thing out there, not that it's easy to get to. and then we decide what the action item is, and somebody has to be assigned responsibility for it so that we know that it gets handled. So that's the issue solving track. A copy of that is in your handouts. So the next component is the process component, and this is simply having everything documented. I believe I have some more stuff in your handouts about this. What this is not is that 3-ring notebook full of stuff about our processes and procedures that nobody reads. You know, I first encountered this when I was a manager in Denver. I was transferred into a ridiculously dysfunctional office, me and a couple other people, and we had to start making changes. And I fired somebody, and I just did it, you know, kind of the old-fashioned way. Here's a box, fill it up, and get out. Because I just thought that's the way we did it, all right? So I called the HR, and back then, back in the 90s, it was place an ad in the newspaper, tell them what we need. A couple weeks later, you know, it happens again, the next person, it's time for them to go. I call HR. At that time, it was Lindsay Oster, who's now a VP at Continental Western, but she asked me the question, Jeff, have you even read the management manual? And my response was, we have a management manual? You know, who knew? She overnighted one out to me, but it was a thick 3-ring notebook, and somewhere in there was a process for letting somebody go. Admittedly, I didn't read it then either. It was just easier to call her and ask her what to do. But that's not the kind of thing we're going for when we're trying to document our processes. We want to keep them really simple. And we're just looking at perhaps our 6 to 10 core processes for running the business. You know, here's some samples. But the way it's done is like with, we'll just take the HR process, let's say the hiring process. The process here, when you decide you need to hire somebody, you need to source somebody. You need to screen and interview somebody. Then you need to onboard somebody. You have 3 major steps to the process. Put those 3 steps on a piece of paper and put maybe, you know, 6, 8 bullet points behind them, which are, you know, the steps beyond that. If you're getting into more detail than that, nobody will read or follow your process. Does that make sense? So, and this kind of stuff can't be overnight. The ideal way to do it is to pick one process at a time, and about once a quarter, get it down on paper. It shouldn't be any more than 2 pages, and it should be mostly white space. And you know, and if you're like me, I love to write things out into minutia. I'm that kind of guy, but I know no one's going to read it, and if they don't read it, they don't follow it. So it's better to err on the side of simplicity and keeping it short so people don't just put it away. All right, so with process, you know, the next thing is just make sure it's followed by all. So we keep that short. Now here's the traction part. This is where we pull it all together. There's 2 components to this, rocks and the meeting pulse. So when we're getting to the second page of your vision traction organizer there, you're going to see the 1-year plan place. And that's where we put some objectives. And the way, under the SMART objectives, you're going to have a space for some rocks. And these are really your annual goals. And what this has to be, you know, you get together with your leadership team and you list all the things we need to do to achieve our 1-year plan, but then you have to narrow it down to about 3 to 7 things for the whole year. You know, this can be pretty hard, but you figure out what are the most critical things that we have to do, and this is where you focus as an organization. When we get into our quarterly pulse, our quarterly meetings, every quarter, you're going to figure out what are the 3 to 5 things as a business owner or as a leadership team that we need to do to move things along in the next 90 days. You know, debate and settle on those things. And what happens is nobody's allowed to come up with another rock like 30 days into it and throw it over the wall and say, we need to do these things. You know, and this happens all the time. Hey, you know, I was driving last night and I thought of an idea. We should really do this. Or, you know, we should check into this. And, you know, we start out the quarter focused on just a handful of things, and then we start bringing in new things that we ought to do. We get distracted by new ideas, new opportunities, and at the end of the quarter, we really haven't gotten very much done. So real discipline has to come into this. And if someone brings in one of those ideas, or if you have one of those ideas, you have to have the discipline to put it on the issues list and keep it there till the end of the quarter. And if in the next quarter it turns out to be one of those top 3 to 5 things, well, then you'll get it done. But until it reaches that level, it's just not critical. Now, when you do this, you've got your 3 to 5 things for the leadership team. Also, everybody will come up with their own couple of rocks. You know, maybe they'll take responsibility for one of those big ones for the company, but they've also got the ones for their division. So everybody's got a few things that they need to get done every 90 days. Then every week we're going to meet about this. This is where you really start to get the traction. We call this the Level 10 meeting. And I'm just going to walk through the agenda. And you know, this stuff, it's just so simple and seems mundane, but when you master all of these things, the acceleration that happens in your business is incredible. So this agenda, and that's in there, this is a 90-minute meeting. Start on time, end time, same time every week, same people, same place. Establish the discipline of starting on time. You know, it's on time is late. You know, early is on time is late when it comes to these meetings. Segue is just 5 minutes to get everybody settled. We're going to start with the reporting section. We take a look at the scorecard, and we're going to review the numbers. And in this section, if there's a trend in the scorecard that's not looking good, we're not going to talk about it. All we're going to do is acknowledge, hey, you know what? The customer complaints is trending up. Okay, acknowledged, and we're going to drop it down to the issues list for the day. Then we're going to review our rocks. We're going to go through the corporate rocks, and we're going to go through your individual rocks. And basically, when it's your turn, you report on task, off task. We don't need to talk about it. If there's anything off task, we're just going to move that rock down to the issues list for the day. Next is customer employee headlines, just a quick report. You know, we've got a major customer complaining about this, or we've got an employee issue here or something. We don't need to talk about it. We're just acknowledging that it's an issue. We're getting it down to the issues list. From our meeting last week, we had a to-do list. When we were solving issues, the solution usually included an action item, and someone said, this is going to happen in the next 7 days, and you're responsible for it, Joe, okay? So when we come to the next week, say, Joe, you know, that action item, done or not done? Joe says done. All right, if he says not done, it moves down to the to-do list. But about 90% of everything ought to be done. About 90% of your rocks ought to be on task as we're going through this. So now we have, we've gone through our to-do list. Now we've got our issues list, and we go to that issues track of the things that have come up in the reporting section and the things that carried over from last week, or the things that we've been carrying around for months on this list. We're just going to take a quick look at them and say, all right, what are the top 3 right now? We're going to identify, discuss, and solve those, and if we have time left over, we're going to go to the next 3. And that's how we conduct this meeting. And eventually, a leadership team, we've got a lot of time for this reporting section. It'll get down to like 20 minutes because you go fast, and you've got like a full hour to really focus on issues and getting them handled. Remember, at the beginning of today, I talked about the idea of taking these issues, and instead of putting duct tape around them and twine, you have a focused, healthy discussion about it. You make a decision, and then you're done with it. And it might not ever come back. This is the way we handle it. You've got to have all those components together, and then we pull it all together with traction in the Level 10 meeting. After we've done this, we conclude our meeting. We recap the to-do list so everyone's clear on what they have to do next week. We decide as a business owner or as a leadership team, how do we cascade our messages? We've made some decisions probably. And these decisions might impact employees, they might impact customers, they might impact vendors. What we don't want is the sales leader who's scheduled to meet with his team right after this meeting to go out and tell everybody the news, and then say the operations leader who isn't scheduled to meet with her team until tomorrow to talk to them tomorrow after they've already heard through the grapevine everything. Or we don't want vendors hearing over the phone, or we might want to decide how we're going to tell people. So we always put time built into the meeting agenda to talk about how we're going to cascade these things out so we don't create issues for next week. Finally, every meeting, whether it's your quarterly meeting, weekly meeting, everything, we just go around the room and say, Shannon, on a scale of 1 to 10 today, how did we do? Shannon says 10. Great. Just by virtue of rating the meetings, we get really effective at this stuff. All right. So hopefully at this point, you see how traction pulls it all together. When we've got a really strong vision, when we've got the right people on the bus with the right structure, in the right seats, we've got data telling us what's going on, we understand what the issues are in our business, we recognize them, and we get them on the list, and we have a way to handle those issues. And again, our processes are working for us, so we're consistent and high quality all the time. And then we've just got that traction, that 7-day meeting pulse and that quarterly meeting pulse that just, it completely accelerates the way your business operates. The things that we've been carrying over from 2010 and making them 2011 goals, or from quarter to quarter, we just have a system to systematically knock them out of the way and recognize when things are in the way so we can get them handled. Does all that make sense? All right. I've flown through this. I don't know if there's any questions. All right. Well, thanks for listening. Again, you've got some tools to take home with you. All this stuff is in a book called Traction. I brought some copies if anyone's interested in the book, or if you have questions or want to talk about any of this stuff, just give me a call. Thank you for coming.
Thanks.